One of the most vexing problems in public education is an achievement gap between white and minority students. Our next guest has conducted research on ways to address this problem. Dr. Seth Gershenson is professor of public policy at American University. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Let's get into one of your key findings that actually predates your most recent study, and that is that when it comes to this achievement gap and addressing it, the teacher's race makes a big difference. How so?
Yeah, that's right. So a study that we published 2 years ago has gotten a lot of attention, and it builds on previous work that shows that when students have a same-race teacher, they have better test scores. And we built on that work to look at long-run outcomes that we really care about. You know, the test score gap is really only interesting to the extent that test scores predict long-run outcomes like earnings, college graduation, and so on. So we look to see whether these race match effects really do carry out to long-run outcomes. And we do so using two different data sources. One is a actual experiment where students and teachers were randomly assigned to classrooms in Tennessee. The other is in North Carolina. And in both data sets, we find very compelling evidence that, yes, when you have at least one black teacher in elementary school, black students are significantly more likely to complete high school and to enroll in college. So that just shows that those same-race teacher effects on test scores are not one-off flukes or anything like that, but they really do affect students' long-run outcomes.
This leads then into a new study that you've done in connection with the Fordham Institute.
Right.
And this involves this effect of the same-race teacher effect and charter schools. Tell us about that.
Right. So the Fordham Institute was interested in whether these race match effects that are traditionally documented in traditional public schools also show up in charter schools. So once again, we got data from North Carolina. North Carolina Education Research Data Center is a group at Duke in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, that make very rich administrative data available to researchers. And this really gave us an opportunity to dig in and see what's happening in charter schools. And the short answer is yes, these race match effects do exist in charter schools, and they're actually bigger. So the effect on test scores is about twice as large as it is in traditional public schools.
Do you have a sense from the research as to why?
Generally, we don't know exactly why, but there's likely a few different reasons. One reason in particular has to do with expectations, we think. There's a similar same-race effect on teacher expectations. They're much more likely to expect that a student will complete college. And in other work that I've done with colleagues at Johns Hopkins, we show that teacher expectations matter for college completion and long-run outcomes as well. So one factor is certainly this idea of high expectations. Another related idea is a role model effect, where especially for more disadvantaged students, seeing a teacher who looks like them from a neighborhood like theirs, it sends a signal that, you know, rising to a professional career in the middle class is possible. And then the third story is that there's probably better communication. And there's different names for this type of communication. Some people may call it culturally relevant pedagogy, or teaching a hidden curriculum. But these ideas are all interrelated in the sense that when you have a teacher who looks like you get more out of the relationship and build a deeper, more trusting relationship.
That is the voice of Professor Seth Gershenson of American University talking about this new interesting study done in connection with the Fordham Institute involving teacher race and charter schools. So you have some interesting findings. What do you hope will come out of this? I know that there are some ideas of where to go forward now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important question. So the first obvious response is, well, then let's hire a more diverse teaching force. The student population in the United States is about 50% white right now, and the teaching force is 80 to 85% white. So there's an imbalance there. So a lot of people will read our research and others' research on the topic and say, well, we have to diversify the teaching force. And while that's certainly an important and laudable goal, that's not feasible in the short run. The reason is that the supply of non-white teachers just isn't there right now. So there's a pipeline problem or supply problem. So a long-run goal is to absolutely get more non-white, Black, and Hispanic teachers or I should say students into college and interested in teaching career, but that's very much a longer term goal. So for policymakers and school leaders right now, what can we do today? There's a few things. One is to make more creative use of the diversity that we do have in our classrooms. So one simple idea is that if there's a handful of black teachers in a school, say, we could rearrange the school day so that all students interact with all teachers over the course of a year. Maybe that's through having different special topics or mixing classes or things like that. Another idea is that these role model effects don't necessarily have to come from teachers. We can also bring professionals from the community into schools to give little, career fair type presentations or other just discussions about what they do and how they were successful in school and so on. So, for example, there's a really neat experiment where a high school in France this isn't exactly the same context as here, but this high school in France had female scientists come to ninth grade science classrooms and give short 15-minute presentations about what they do in a given day at their work. And this had a big effect on female high school students' later enrollment in college and science and STEM programs. So that wasn't teachers, that was just bringing in professionals and sort of benefiting and piggybacking on this role model effect. So we could absolutely do things like that in public schools here. And lastly, we can do much better at training all of our teachers of all backgrounds to better empathize and work with students of all backgrounds.
And I gathered from the research another important thing was making sure that these teachers have high expectations for all students.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I meant by some of these training programs and professional development programs. There's a lot of compelling work right now that even a relatively short 1-hour training program can move the needle on teachers' empathy levels, expectation levels, and attitudes towards students of different backgrounds for teachers of all types. So there are professional development opportunities out there that all teachers of all backgrounds would benefit from.
One thing I wanted to clarify before we wrap up is this notion of the impact of the teacher's race. This doesn't mean that a student has to have the teacher of the same race to succeed, just at least some access to having someone of the same race at some point, whether it is the teacher or someone from the outside.
Right. So a few points about that. The first, one of the more nuanced results in our work is that for a lot of this benefit comes from just having one black teacher. So in other words, the extra benefit of a second black teacher is relatively small once you've had that first exposure. And similarly, in the Fordham study, we show that the effects are muted in schools with black principals, which is really interesting. So again, it suggests that sort of any sort of exposure sort of delivers this role model benefit or this race match effect. And again, we can use that information to better and more strategically allocate our teachers our teachers that we have.